Welcome back to Black and Blue Garage. I've been pushing this truck around the shop with no track bar. The only thing holding the body from swinging back and forth are these two ratchet straps. And I'm getting to the point where I need this to be solid. I want to be able to push this around and not worry anymore about it being all floppy. So down here I've got some brackets for the axle side and the frame side. I've got this 1.5 inch tube that I bought. I also have the original Ford F100 track bar, and then I have the original track bar or Panhard bar that came off the Jeep Comanche, which is really short for this axle. I think I can cobble some of these parts together to make a track bar, so it'll look nice, it'll clear everything, and it'll be just perfect. You know, when you're building stuff like this, most of your ideas come from this position right here. Anyway, let's go ahead and take off. What the heck? This is supposed to be super easy, quick release ratchet. And maybe I'm not smart enough to use this thing. I'm supposed to be able to push this button right here. You gotta be 10% smarter than the equipment, Thomas. I think I broke it. That's awesome. Okay. Anyway, I'm also using another ratchet strap as a drag link, because when I was pushing this around, the wheels kept on going like this. One ratchet strap on the front, I got a ratchet strap on the back of each, and that kept the wheels kind of straight. And I can kind of steer manually by loosening and tightening all these ratchet straps. Well, that's beginning to become a pain in the butt. And I didn't really want to spend all the money and buy the, few $100 it costs to do the track bar and the steering and everything like that, but getting to the point where not being annoyed is worth the money. So, getting back into the engineering position of laying down and just looking at the underside of your truck, with the wheels pointing straight forward, I kind of want to measure and see how long this steering track bar is, or steering tie rod is, and I'm right at 40 inches. So because you want your Panhard bar to be the same length, we're going to set these brackets up 40 inches apart and try to make the track bar that length. Also, when this axle is at full bump, I want this track bar to be right underneath the engine oil pan, and I want it to be right below the top of this truss, so that when the axle moves all the way up to the full bump position, everything is flat right underneath this pan. Let me put these brackets on temporarily and we'll come back. Okay, so I found out that if I put my brackets right about here, that's about 38 or 39 inches away from each other, which is close enough to the length of my steering, maybe an inch or two off, but that's close enough for me. All right, let's talk safety for a minute. Whenever you put a vehicle on jack stands, you want to get it a safe distance and give it what's called a bump test. And that's basically, you just give it one of these and make sure that it's not wobbly and gonna fall over. That way you can feel a little bit safer crawling under there and working on stuff on the bottom of your Jeep. I've got these jack stands on those miniature furniture dollies. That way I can put the axle on this jack stand and I can move it back and forth to make sure the axle is in the middle of the truck. Now, the reason why I took the tires off is because I need to turn these knuckles so that I know when I put the bracket on that side, it's not going to have any interference. With these both facing forward and this ratchet strap on there, I can just turn this one to full lock. Now I know that this knuckle is at full lock and that knuckle is at full lock. I can go ahead and line up this bracket where it needs to be and know that I'm not going to hit right on this bar. Okay, I've got that piece cut how I want it. Next I need to weld that bracket onto there. Okay, now that bracket is tacked on there pretty good. Next step is to make sure this axle is
dead center of the truck. For that, I like to use a plumb bob. This doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but you want to get as close to perfect as possible, because when you set up your track bar, you're only going to be able to adjust in and out about an inch or so. So the closer to the dead center this axle is when you measure everything out and set it up, the better. Now, I'm looking at two things right here. First, the length of this, which is right around 38.5 inches, which is 1.5 inches shorter than I wanted it to be, but that's okay. And also, where these holes are mounted up, I want the hole on this side to be mounted to where when this track bar is fully in the up position, it's still below the oil pan. And I want this to be in the middle hole on the axle side, so that when the axle is at full bump, it brings this track bar below that truss. The second thing I'm looking at is where this track bar is going to be located in this area here, because you've got your pitman arm right here, and you've got your truss and your diff cover right there. So if you mount this bracket too far forward, your track bar is going to be hitting your pitman arm. But if you mount it too far backward, your track bar might contact the truss and this diff cover right here. I think if I mount this track bar mount right about here, right in the middle of those two, I think I'll be fine. Now before I mount this on there, and because I already know how long I want my track bar to be, let's go ahead and build the track bar first. Hook it up on both ends, and then see where this is going to sit. Okay, so this is an important step that I think is worth not skipping, because, and it has to do with how you are going to adjust your track bar. The total threads on this is about, we can call that 2 inches. We round that up to 2 inches. Now, I would like to have a very minimum thread contact of 1.5 times the thickness of this. That means you only have about 1 inch on each side of adjustment. So because you want to adjust it in or out, you would want to thread this on about halfway up that last inch. When I make this tube, I'm going to thread this thing all the way in to about there. That way I can thread these link ends out 1/2 inch each direction. So I can go basically into where the nut stops and then out. You don't have much room at all of adjustment. That's why it's so important to make sure that your axle is centered and you measure how long this track bar is going to be before you put it together. I'm going to put this nut right at about 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch on both ends. And that way I can make this about 1/2 inch shorter or almost 1 inch longer. And if I really screwed up, you could always make a tube longer and shorter with an insert. So then, once I have that where I need it to be, I'm going to hand tighten these both, double check on my measurement, about 3/4 inch. I'll make them both the same, and then I'll cut my tube and weld these to be 38.5 inches. Alright, so check this out because it's pretty cool actually. So I'm about to weld this insert onto this tube, and I need to ground this tube with the welder. I learned this trick from doing my 4-link kit on the back. If you take a metal ring or a metal hook, I didn't figure this out, I learned this from somebody else. But you hook on you hook your ground to a metal hook, and your tube will stay grounded while you spin this. So I can weld, I can brace up against my knee and weld this nice and steady while turning this and sitting on my stool, and everything will look really nice. And that way I don't have to reposition my ground strap. Just let that hang there. So that tube got pretty hot welding that up, so while I let that cool, I'm going to clean off all the paint from right here so I can weld this bracket on it a little bit. Who welded this?